In terms of diet, what are the main drivers? Sounds like seed oils is one of them, and we're going to go deep there in a moment. But how do you think about the drivers in terms of diet?
I have sort of four fundamental rules when it comes to a diet that will resolve insulin resistance or prevent it entirely. The first one, and I have them kind of ordered in what I think is a almost a priority list. The first one is control carbohydrates. Now, some people either willfully or unintentionally misunderstand that. I'm not declaring war on carbohydrates, but I am saying this is generally going to be the biggest offender. That we are a culture, more than just us in the US, by the way, as I've given talks on insulin resistance around the world, this is just as relevant to certain countries in Southeast Asia and many countries in the Middle East as it is here in the US. But we are a culture that is obsessed with refined carbohydrates. And we get the bulk of our carbohydrates from bags and boxes with barcodes. And so when I say control carbohydrates, I mean look at those sources. If you're opening up a bag or a box to get your carbs, that's going to be a bad source of carbohydrate. And thus, we should focus more on the least processed versions of carbohydrates, namely fruits and vegetables, eaten not as a solid, not drinking them as a liquid. So eat the fruit and vegetables, don't drink them. And that is a way to get maximizing the nutrients that come from fruits and vegetables, which can be healthy, while minimizing the amount of easily processed starch and sugars. So that's the first rule, control carbohydrates, because the more you're spiking up your glucose in your blood, which only comes from carbohydrates, the more you're going to be spiking insulin. And as a reminder, elevated insulin is a cause of insulin resistance. And the second rule is prioritize protein. Protein is an essential macronutrient, and we need to make sure we get enough of it to maintain healthy muscle and bone mass. The more lean mass we're maintaining, the easier it is to control glucose and insulin, and the more easy it's going to be for the body to be insulin sensitive. Protein also has a very high degree of satiety, and so it will naturally help a person just eat better portions and not overeat. It'll help control overeating. So prioritize protein. And then the third fits with the second, which is don't fear fat. I say that fits with the second rule of prioritizing protein because in nature, the best proteins come with fat. There's no exception to this. We, in our hubris, have come to these new ways of extracting protein and getting protein into humans, namely by getting protein from plants. Plants are so generally protein deficient that we have to really extract. We have to really work hard or have machines work hard for us to extract proteins from plants. Now, that could be fine, except plants don't, that those if we're getting protein from peas, we're not getting any fat from the pea. And fat helps protein digest better. It is literally more anabolic. It is more muscle stimulating to have fat and protein than it is to have protein alone. So we shouldn't fear the fat that comes with protein naturally, as we're getting the most nutritious sources of protein, namely from meat, dairy, and eggs. And those are the most bioavailable proteins for humans, and it's not even close. So as we are focusing on getting those good proteins, we shouldn't be afraid of the fat that comes with it. So if that meat has fat in it, well, then let's eat the fat. If that egg has a yolk in it, well, we'll eat the yolk. If that milk has fat in it, well, we'll get full fat dairy and not skim. So that's that third rule with don't fear the fat. And then lastly, it's fast. We need to get off this roller coaster where we're putting something in our mouths every 2 to 3 hours. And this is why chronically elevated insulin has become such a relevant variable to insulin resistance, because the average individual overnight while they've been sleeping, insulin levels have come down to a fasting level. And then they immediately spike their glucose and insulin by eating a sugary, starchy breakfast. And this is the majority of breakfasts nowadays. We will eat cereal or toast or bagels, and we're putting lots of sugar in our coffee, or we're having juice. And all of these things are going to just skyrocket insulin to 10 times what it was before we started eating. And then it'll take insulin a few hours to come back down. Well, right as insulin is cresting its peak and coming down, we bump it back up again by having a mid-morning snack. And then once again, right before insulin's coming down, we bump it up again with a starchy lunch with some sandwiches or more bagels or more juice or some soda. And we do it again for a mid-afternoon snack. We do it again for dinner. And we do it maybe worst of all, well, comparable maybe only to breakfast, for our evening snack right before we go to bed. So we are living every waking moment in a state of elevated insulin, and even well into our sleeping moments, as it takes several hours for that big bowl of ice cream to kind of clear through the system. It's just too many people only focus on the energy and ignore the hormone aspect to their detriment. So the first step is a low insulin step. Now, if you need to get off a plateau, now it's the low calorie step. And that's where the fourth rule comes in, which is fasting. I am not a fan of low fat foods at all. Those are not natural foods. We should always eat fat as it comes naturally with the protein it comes with, and even be liberal with things like butter and olive oil or whatever. But then so it's not that we're eating low fat to cut calories, and it's not that we're making ourselves hungry all the time by eating very small portions. We fast. And so that's when the person starts using intermittent fasting, multi-day fasting or every other day fasting. There are any number of protocols that work with fasting, but that's a good way to just start trimming back on the energy coming in. And now you are cooking with gas. You have low insulin, and you've combined that with a lower calorie approach that is fitting within some eating windows that you give yourself, and you're fasting, not taking in calories during the other periods of time. And that is going to be the next step to get a person off of a plateau if they got on one in the first place.
So, in summarizing everything we've talked about today, what are the top three things, if you will, that one should focus on if you want to take care of your metabolic health, you want to feel better, you want to look better, you want to live longer? I want to start right now. How do you rank the top three?
Yeah. Well, I won't take the easy route, which is just going through those same dietary rules, but I would say lower your insulin through the dietary interventions I just mentioned. So much of longevity research nowadays focuses on these proteins like mTOR, for example. Anyone who's kind of dived into longevity knows mTOR a lot. A lot of the mTOR focused research nowadays emphasizes the role of proteins in activating mTOR. And just by way of a brief primer for people who aren't overly familiar, mTOR is a protein that will inhibit autophagy, which is a process whereby the cells kind of stay youthful and young, if you will. And so the more you inhibit that process, the more aged the cells become. Well, a lot of people have said protein activates mTOR, which inhibits autophagy, so you should avoid protein. And I disagree with that view completely. If you want to focus on activating autophagy and keeping mTOR turned down more frequently than it's turned up, all the more reason to focus on lowering insulin, because insulin will activate mTOR more than any combination of amino acids will. So if mTOR is relevant for longevity, all the more reason to scrutinize insulin, not dietary protein. So the first approach would be lower your insulin through the dietary interventions I already elaborated on, those 4 pillars.
That keep us healthy, that promote longevity, that reduce chronic inflammation. And so protein really is, I like to think of almost everything we eat as words that we're speaking to ourselves with. And when we eat protein, what we're saying to the body is, you're full. We've had enough food and you don't need to eat much more. And when we're missing protein or we're missing micronutrients, when we are missing key elements that the body needs to function, the body will essentially through hormones tell you to keep eating until it gets what it needs. And because our diet is both from poor soil and industrially processed, because almost 70% of our calories are from ultra processed foods, our food have so little value in them that of course the body is driving us to be insatiably hungry because it's desperate for us to actually give it what it needs. And this is why we are literally the only species in the world that's eating itself to death, because we're not giving the body what it needs. We're giving those mixed signals. So this is why real food, whole food, protein-rich food from good soil that's not processed is so important because it's more words to the body that says you've got what you need. So those are my thoughts on protein. And I would just add one more thing, Jason, which is that there's other ways we communicate with the body. And of course, one of the things that I think a lot about is glucose spikes. And we talk a lot about satiety in protein because it's such an amazing nutrient that helps these nutrient sensing cells know to secrete satiety hormones. But there's this other layer to hunger that I think is so fascinating, which is that when we eat refined carbohydrates, refined sugars, and have that large glucose excursion, the big glucose spike, that's often followed with a big glucose crash. So the magnitude of the spike often mirrors the extent of a crash after that, because the body's responding to a big glucose spike, secretes all this insulin to soak up the glucose out of the bloodstream, and then that often leads to this like overcompensatory crash. And interestingly, a study from Nature, one of the premier medical journals, just about a year or 2 years ago, showed that it's actually the extent of the glucose crash that determines how hungry we're going to be later in the day and how much we're going to crave carbohydrates. And it makes sense. If your glucose is plummeting, that's a very scary signal for the body, and your body wants to bring it back up to baseline. So this is why having like a big glucose spike in the morning with a big crash is going to essentially set you up for the entire day to be wanting carbohydrates and be hungry and to eat more calories. And the extent of that crash is predictive of how much you're going to consume. So when we take all of these things together, this is why a high protein breakfast with very little glucose spike is going to absolutely be the best thing you can do to set yourself up for a day of really healthy eating patterns where we're not overeating and we feel that natural satiety.
In this video, I want to touch on lifestyle actions you can take to overcome insulin resistance. I have many videos on this topic, and I will share a link to one of those videos in the description area. For now, let me give you the cliff notes to get you started. Number 1, don't drink carbs. This includes soda, energy drinks, sweet tea, and fruit juice. These drinks contain nothing to slow the absorption of the sugars, leading to steep blood sugar and insulin spikes. Number 2, say no to sugar and stay low with starch. Dessert, bread, cereal, potatoes, and pasta. Like the drinks I just mentioned, these foods digest too quickly for good metabolic health. Number 3, eat, stop, eat. Frequent meals, especially those with refined carbs, keep blood sugar and insulin elevated. Instead, eat low-carb, healthy fat meals that are substantial enough to carry you through to your next meal. Number 4, stop eating 3 hours before bed. Putting your digestive system to rest before you go to bed frees insulin from having to work overnight, and you benefit from improved insulin sensitivity and fat loss. And number 5, move more. Regular exercise makes it easier for your cells to take in glucose, reversing the resistance they once had, and any form from walking to high-intensity training will help. When you overcome insulin resistance, you will notice additional changes such as fewer cravings and more energy. And while these are wonderful to experience, they are subjective changes and therefore hard to quantify. In this video, I focused on objective signs, namely looking for skin improvements, including fading dark spots and fewer skin tags. Measuring your waist circumference and bringing it under the danger zone is another sign you're moving in the right direction. With the help of a blood draw from your doctor, you can check your HOMA-IR result now and compare it to the result you get after making diet and exercise changes.
All of these religions did not prescribe fasting to their believers because they wanted to harm them. In fact, it's something that's deeply intrinsically beneficial. And we know this from the science that there's so many benefits. Benefits for weight loss, benefits for insulin sensitivity and type 2 diabetes, for heart disease, for cancer, for liver disease, and also just to feel better, for mental clarity. There's so many amazing benefits. Everybody's always worried about fasting. They're always worried, well, can I really do it? Well, think about this for a second. Consider all these religions, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Mormons, all of these people. All of these people are fasting on a regular basis every year for their entire adult lives. So can you do it? Well, millions and millions and millions of people do it. There's no reason why you can't do it. So there's lots of people who will tell you not to fast. Who? Well, there's this guy, Ronald McDonald. He doesn't want you to fast. And this happy little mermaid, she doesn't want you to fast. They're not going to make any money, right? They need you to eat. There's profits, there's shareholders, right? In the end, you really got to ask yourself, when it comes to your health, to your well-being, who are you going to trust? Jesus Christ or Colonel Sanders?